He, a grumpy and reclusive tycoon, disillusioned with love, lived in a cold, inhuman mansion. She, a pure and innocent young woman, worked as a cleaning lady in the mansion, feeling invisible and insignificant. In a moment of his vulnerability, she, with her innate calm and compassion, is the only one around to help him discreetly. Brian watches her, not as an employee, but as a woman. He notices the dignity, the purity, and the lack of interest in his status. Her innocence captivates him in a way he has never felt. The cynical millionaire is confronted with the undeniable truth of Laura's innocence, both in her body and soul, and it is there that he discovers he loves her. Get ready for a twist, where a forbidden love between the tycoon and the virgin cleaning lady generates a scandal, and high society will do everything to expose her purity. But her untouched soul may be the only key to healing a broken heart. Watch this story until the end. You will be amazed. If you like love stories, romance, subscribe to this channel, leave your comment. We post videos like this every day. Continuing. The alarm clock rang at 5 in the morning, as it did every day. Laura Costa rubbed her tired eyes and got out of the thin mattress she shared with her younger sister in the small back room of their house in Queens. The smell of weak coffee already wafted from the kitchen, where her mother, Marlene, was preparing the family's breakfast before leaving for her job at the garment factory. "Good morning, Mom," Laura whispered, kissing the wrinkled face of the woman who had raised 3 children alone after the premature death of her husband. "God bless you, my dear, and be careful with that grumpy boss of yours," Marlene replied, adjusting her daughter's simple uniform. "Rich men like that are no good. They only think about money and power." Laura smiled tenderly. At 26 years old, she had learned not to judge people by appearances or by what others said. She grabbed her worn purse and headed for the bus stop, where she would begin the 2-hour journey to reach Manhattan's Upper East Side. Brian Albright's mansion stood imposingly on Fifth Avenue, with its perfectly manicured gardens and the glass and marble facade that reflected the morning sun. Laura passed through the employee's gate, greeted the security guard with a shy wave, and headed for the locker room. She put on her impeccable uniform, white shirt, gray skirt, low heels, and tied her brown hair in a discreet bun. Meanwhile, on the 40th floor of the commercial building that bore his name in Midtown, Brian Albright was ending another sleepless night. At 39 years old, the CEO of Albright Tech had built a technology and investment empire that stretched across the Americas. His companies developed innovative solutions. His philanthropic projects fed thousands of needy children, but his heart remained as empty as a locked vault. "Mr. Albright, the meeting with the Japanese investors has been rescheduled for 10, informed Carla, his efficient secretary, entering the office without knocking, a privilege earned after 8 years of impeccable work. Brian merely grunted a response, his eyes fixed on the stock market charts. He had slept 2 hours on the leather couch in the office, as he had been doing frequently. The mansion seemed too big, too silent, filled with expensive furniture and devoid of life. "You should go home and rest," Carla suggested, concerned about the deep circles under her boss's still young face. "Home," Brian repeated bitterly. "That frigid mausoleum? I'd rather stay here." At the mansion on Fifth Avenue, Laura began her meticulous routine. First, the library, 2,000 square feet of books that no one read. Then, the formal dining room, where Brian's solitary meals left only a subtle mark on the mahogany table. She worked in silence, invisible as a shadow, respecting rule number 1, do not disturb the boss. At 7 in the evening, Brian finally decided to go home. The driver dropped him off at the main entrance, and he went straight to the home office, ignoring the supper that the cook had prepared. He needed to review the contracts for the acquisition of a startup in Austin. Laura was supposed to have left at 6, but had stayed to finish cleaning the wine cellar. It was almost 8 o'clock when she climbed the marble stairs to fetch some, cleaning supplies from the closet on the second floor. It was then that she heard a strange noise coming from the office, a muffled groan, followed by the sound of something heavy falling to the floor. Laura hesitated. It was not her job to interfere in the boss's affairs, but the sound seemed like pain of someone in distress. Her instincts as an older daughter, accustomed to taking care of her family, spoke louder than protocol. She knocked lightly on the ajar door. "Mr. Albright, are you all right?" Silence. She took a deep breath and pushed the door open. Brian was lying next to the table, his face pale, one hand pressed against his chest. His dark eyes, usually cold and calculating, now reflected confusion and fear. "Sir, what happened?" Laura ran to him, kneeling on the polished wood floor. "I'll call an ambulance." "No," he managed to whisper, grabbing her wrist with surprising force. It's not a heart attack, it's panic." The words came out like a confession, dragged out by force. Brian Albright, the tycoon who commanded meetings with hundreds of people, who closed deals worth millions without batting an eye, was having a panic attack on the floor of his own office. Laura did not hesitate. She had seen her mother go through similar episodes after her father's death. With gentle movements, she helped Brian sit leaning against the wall, took a glass of water from the side table, and settled down next to him. "Breathe with me," she said in a calm voice, holding his trembling hand between her small, calloused ones. "Slowly. Inhale. Exhale. Inhale." For 20 minutes, they remained like that. The humble cleaning lady and the millionaire CEO sitting on the floor, she guiding his breathing until the tremors ceased and the color returned to his male face. When Brian finally raised his eyes, he saw something that shocked him more than the crisis itself: genuine compassion. There was no judgment in Laura's eyes, no morbid curiosity, no calculating interest that he saw in the eyes of everyone around him. Just a pure kindness, without ulterior motives. "Thank you," he murmured, his voice still weak. Can you forget what you saw here?" Laura smiled, the first real smile he had seen in years. "Forget what, Mr. Albright?" And at that moment, something moved in Brian's chest, a warm spark amidst years of ice, distrust, and disillusionment. For the first time in a long time, he really saw the woman in front of him. Not the employee, not the invisible cleaning lady, but Laura, a woman with gentle eyes and a heart bigger than any fortune he could amass. In the following days, Brian couldn't get Laura out of his thoughts. For the first time in years, he arrived home before 8 in the evening, making up excuses to Carla about cancelled meetings and postponed appointments. In reality, he hoped to find the cleaning lady in the mansion's hallways, but she seemed to have become even more invisible, avoiding any area where he might be. Laura, in turn, felt torn between genuine concern for her boss and the fear of having overstepped boundaries. She had reorganized her entire routine to clean the rooms when Brian wasn't present. What had happened that night haunted her. Not the panic attack itself, but the raw vulnerability she had seen in his eyes, so different from the cold, distant image everyone knew. "You've been acting strange, honey," Marlene commented while they prepared dinner in their small apartment. "Any problems at work?" "No, Mom, everything's normal." Laura stirred the beans more forcefully than necessary, trying to push away the memories of that night. "Be careful not to get attached to that rich man, Laura. People like us don't mix with people like him. It only leads to heartbreak." Her mother's words echoed in her mind throughout the week. Marlene was right. There were worlds between her and Brian Albright. He graced magazine covers, dined with politicians and CEOs, traveled in private jets. She woke up at 5 in the morning, took 3 buses to work, and supported her family with her cleaning lady's salary. Brian, however, couldn't accept the return to mutual invisibility. On Thursday, he broke protocol for the first time in years. "Ms. Costa," he called when he saw her arranging the flowers in the entrance hall. Laura jumped, dropping 2 yellow roses on the marble floor. "Mr. Albright, I'm sorry, I didn't—" She knelt quickly to pick up the flowers, her hands trembling. "Slightly. No need to apologize." Brian approached, noticing how she avoided his gaze. "I'd like to talk to you for a moment." Laura's heart raced. Was she going to be fired? Maybe he had regretted showing vulnerability and wanted to get rid of the only witness to his weakness. "Of course, sir. Did I do something wrong?" In contrary, Brian hesitated, the words sounding strange in his mouth. "I wanted to thank you properly for what you did on Monday. Your discretion and kindness were—" "No need to thank me, sir. Anyone would have done the same." "No." Brian shook his head, a bitter smile touching his lips. "Not anyone would have. Believe me." Laura finally raised her eyes, meeting his. For a moment, time seemed suspended. She saw again that fragility hidden behind the mask of power, and he saw the sincerity that had touched him so deeply. "I'd like you to have dinner with me tonight," Brian said impulsively, the words coming out before he could censor them. The silence that followed was deafening. Laura stared at him as if he had spoken in a foreign language. So that wouldn't be appropriate. I'm just the cleaning lady, I know." Brian ran a hand through his hair, frustrated with himself. "Forget what I said. It was inappropriate." He turned to leave, but Laura's soft voice stopped him. "It's not about being inappropriate, Mr. Albright. It's that we're from different worlds. You have important commitments, important people to—" "Important people," Brian laughed without humor. "Do you know how many of those important people reached out when I was on the floor having a panic attack? 0. Do you know how many would help me without wanting something in return? 0. Laura felt her heart clench at the bitterness in his voice. "I'm sure that's not true." "It is, and you know how I know." Brian approached, his dark eyes intense. "Because I've tested it. I've been vulnerable in front of people I thought were close. The result was always the same: betrayal, financial interest, opportunism. Not all people are like that." "No?" "Then tell me, Ms. Costa, what's stopping you from accepting dinner with me? Fear of what people will think? What they'll say?" Laura lowered her gaze, her cheeks flushing. Yes, people will talk. They'll say I'm a gold digger, that I want to take advantage of you. And maybe they're right to think that." "Right?" Brian frowned. "Why would they be right?" "Because a poor cleaning lady shouldn't be having dinner with a millionaire, sir. Because that doesn't happen in real life. And because—" She hesitated, struggling against her own words. "Because maybe I really want something I can't have." The confession hung in the air between them like a dangerous secret. Brian took another step closer. "And what would that be that you want?" Before Laura could answer, Carla's shrill voice echoed through the hall. "Brian, where are you? The investors from Korea arrived early." The secretary appeared in the hallway, stopping abruptly when she saw the scene. Brian and Laura were too close, the air charged with a tension she immediately recognized. "Sorry to interrupt," Carla said with an icy smile, her eyes scanning Laura from head to toe. "But we have an urgent situation." "Of course." Brian moved away from Laura, the professional mask returning to his face. "Ms. Costa, you can continue with your work." As Brian walked away with Carla, Laura heard the secretary whisper, "Be careful, Brian. Employees can be complicated, especially the younger, prettier ones." The words hit Laura like a slap. That was exactly what everyone would think, that she was just another opportunist trying to seduce the rich boss. She collected the cleaning supplies with mechanical movements, trying to ignore the pain in her chest. In the office, Carla closed the door behind her. "Brian, I need to talk to you about the cleaning lady. Her name is Laura. Whatever her name is, you need to be careful. A young, beautiful girl working in your house. Malicious people can create stories. And considering you're going to announce your engagement to Helena Montero next week," Brian froze. "What engagement?" "The one your mother and Mr. Montero arranged. The merger of the companies, remember? Helena is perfect for you. Harvard. Graduate, traditional family, knows the rules of the game. You'll announce it at the charity gala next Friday." Reality fell on Brian like a bucket of ice water. He had completely forgotten about the agreement arranged by the families. Helena Montero, beautiful, intelligent, ambitious, and completely calculating. Everything he should want in a wife, and everything that Laura wasn't. That night, Brian stayed late at the office, avoiding going home. When he finally arrived, at the mansion, he found a small envelope on his desk. Inside, a handwritten note in delicate script. "Mr. Albright, I am resigning from my position. Thank you for the opportunity and I apologize for any inconvenience caused. Laura Costa." Brian crumpled the paper, his heart pounding. He ran to the housekeeper's room. "Where's Laura? Why did she quit?" "I don't know, sir. She left the note and left early. She said she wouldn't be back tomorrow." For the first time in years, Brian Albright felt truly desperate. The only genuine person he had found was running away, and he had a week to get engaged to a woman he didn't love. But if Laura thought she could simply disappear from his life, she was sorely mistaken. Brian didn't sleep that night. At 6 in the morning, he was in the car on his way to Queens, a place he had never set foot in, despite funding several social projects in the area. The GPS guided him through narrow streets and simple houses until he stopped in front of a small, well-kept duplex. Laura opened the door still in her nightgown, her hair loose, framing her surprised face. For a moment it seemed like he was seeing a mirage. "Mr. Albright, how did you... I need to talk to you." Brian's voice came out rougher than he intended. "Please. Laura? Who is it?" Marlene's voice came from the kitchen, followed by her footsteps. The woman appeared behind her daughter, her eyes widening at the sight of the impeccably suited man on her doorstep. "Mom, this is Mr. Albright, my former boss." "Former?" Brian raised an eyebrow. "I didn't accept your resignation." "Sir, you can't be here," Laura whispered, glancing nervously at the neighbors who were starting to appear in the windows. "People will talk, they'll think." "Let them think." Brian took a step closer. "I'm not leaving until we talk." Marlene intervened, the suspicion clear in her eyes. "What do you want with my daughter?" "I want her back at work." "Why?" The question came from Laura, who crossed her arms over her chest. "There are hundreds of cleaning ladies in New York. Hire another one." "I don't want another one. I want you." The words carried a weight that went beyond the professional, and everyone present perceived it. Marlene frowned. "Mr. Albright, with all due respect, my daughter is a serious young woman. She won't get involved with a married man." "I'm not married." "But you're going to be," Laura said quietly, her eyes welling up. "I heard your secretary talking about the engagement." Brian clenched his fists. "Carla and her indiscretions. It's complicated." "It's not complicated," Laura retorted, finding courage in her own pain. "You're going to marry a woman from your social class, as you should, and I need to step away before people make up stories about the two of us." "What stories?" "That I enjoy your company. That you make me feel..." Brian stopped, realizing he was revealing too much in front of Laura's. "Mother, can we talk in private?" "No," Marlene said firmly. "My daughter isn't going anywhere with you." A standoff. Brian looked around, noticing the curtains twitching in the neighboring houses, the curious glances of passers-by. His presence there was causing exactly the kind of gossip Laura feared. "All right," he sighed, "then agree to work somewhere else. I have an office downtown that needs cleaning. Business hours, professional environment, other employees around." Laura hesitated. She needed the job. Her family depended on her income. "The same salary?" "Double." "Why are you doing this?" Brian looked at her intensely. "Because you can't just disappear from my life, Laura. Not after what happened between us." "Nothing happened between us," she protested, her cheeks flushing. "No? Then why are you running?" Marlene watched the exchange between the two with growing concern. She knew her daughter well, and she had never seen her so affected by a man. "Laura, come inside, now." "Mom." "Now." Laura obeyed, but before closing the door, she whispered to Brian, "Monday, 8 o'clock at the address you leave with the doorman. Only work, Mr. Albright, nothing more." The cleaning office was on the 20th floor of a commercial building in Midtown. Laura arrived promptly on Monday, wearing a new uniform that Brian had provided. He was waiting for her at the reception, more nervous than before any important negotiation. "Good morning, Ms. Costa." "Good morning, Mr. Albright." He led her through the office, explaining the cleaning routine with an exaggerated formality. That didn't fool either of them. There were only 3 rooms, all connected, which meant they would be working close to each other all day. During the first week, they maintained strictly professional conversations. Brian pretended to work while watching Laura organize the files, clean the desks, water the plants. There was a natural grace in her movements, a gentleness that contrasted with the harshness of the corporate environment. "Mr. Albright," she said on Friday, interrupting his thoughts, "can I ask a personal question?" Brian raised his eyes from the papers he wasn't really reading. "Of course. Why have you never been married? I mean, before this Helena Montero?" The question caught him off guard. Brian leaned back in his chair, considering how much he should reveal. "I was engaged once, 10 years ago." Laura stopped cleaning the bookshelf, paying full attention. "What happened?" "I found out she was cheating on me with my best friend and business partner." The bitterness in Brian's voice was unmistakable. "The day before the wedding." "Oh, my God," Laura whispered, her eyes full of compassion. "The worst part wasn't the betrayal itself," Brian continued, the words coming out like a long repressed confession. "It was finding out that they had been together from the beginning. She pretended to love me while planning to keep half of my fortune in the divorce. And he was like a brother to me. I'm so sorry. Since then, I decided it would be safer to maintain purely transactional relationships. Helena understands. On that, our marriage will be beneficial to both families without romantic illusions." Laura felt her heart clench. "And what do you feel for her?" Brian looked at her intensely. "Nothing. Absolutely nothing." The silence stretched between them, laden with meaning. Laura returned to cleaning the bookshelf, but her hands trembled slightly. "And you?" Brian asked softly. "Have you ever had a serious boyfriend?" Laura blushed violently. "No, not in the way you imagine." "What do you mean?" She hesitated, never having talked about this with anyone besides her sister. "I had some suitors, but when they found out about my family, about our financial difficulties, someone always came along with better conditions. Or then..." She stopped, embarrassed. "Or then what? Or then they just wanted to take advantage. They thought that because I was poor and needed to work, it would be easy to win me over for things I wasn't willing to do." The anger Brian felt was surprising in its intensity. "What kind of things?" Laura couldn't answer, but the blush on her face said it all. Men who tried to buy her favors with empty promises, who saw her economic vulnerability as an opportunity. "Sorry," she murmured. "I shouldn't have talked about it." "Don't be sorry. Never apologize for being decent." Their eyes met again, and this time neither of them looked away. There was something forming between them, a connection that went beyond social differences based on a mutual understanding of past disappointments and the rarity of finding someone genuine. "Laura," Brian said, rising from his chair and approaching her. "You know that what's happening between us is dangerous," she completed, without moving away. "Very dangerous. For both of us. For both of us." But even so, neither of them backed down. For a moment, it seemed that Brian would lean in to kiss her, but the ring of the phone separated them abruptly. "Mr. Albright?" Carla's voice sounded through the intercom. "Helena Montero is here to see you. Should I send her up?" Reality crashed down on them like a cold shower. Brian closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. "Send her up." Laura was already collecting her cleaning supplies when Brian held her by the wrist. "This isn't over," he said quietly, his eyes burning with intensity. "Not between us." And Laura, even knowing that she should deny it, even knowing that she was getting into an impossible situation, only nodded her head. A few seconds later, Helena Montero entered the office like a gust of perfumed wind, all elegance and confidence, the absolute opposite of the woman who had just left through the back door. In the week following the encounter with Helena, Brian became even more distant and formal with Laura. The prospective fiancée had made clear her expectations about the marriage, a strategic union that would consolidate the Albright-Montero empire and eliminate any unnecessary distractions from his life. "You seem tense, darling," Helena had said, her cold eyes scanning the office. "I hope you're not getting involved with people unsuitable." The message was clear. Helena knew. Laura felt the change in the air and remained even more professional, limiting herself to polite greetings and avoiding any conversation that wasn't strictly about work. But the furtive glances continued, charged with an unresolved tension that grew with each day. On Thursday, an unexpected storm hit New York City with unusual force. At 6 in the evening, as Laura prepared to leave, the sky burst into torrential rain accompanied by violent winds that shook the windows of the 20th floor. "You can't go out in this weather," Brian said, watching the lightning illuminate the dark sky. "It's dangerous." "I need to go, Mr. Albright. My family is waiting." "Call them. Tell them you'll stay until the rain passes." Laura hesitated, but a particularly loud thunderclap made the lights flicker, deciding for her. She called home, explaining the situation to her worried mother. They were alone in the office while the storm intensified outside. Brian ordered Chinese takeout for the two of them, a simple intimacy that seemed more meaningful than any dinner in a 5-star restaurant. "Tell me about your family," he said as they shared the yakisoba, sitting on the floor of the conference room, the formalities temporarily suspended by the unusual situation. "My mom has worked in a garment factory for 15 years. My sister Julia is in her senior year of high school. She's very smart, wants to study medicine. And my brother, Kaio, is 12 years old. He's passionate about soccer." Laura's eyes lit up when she talked about her family. "And you? Do you have siblings?" "No. My parents wanted an heir to the empire. They got one, and they stopped there." The bitterness in Brian's voice was evident. "I grew up surrounded by nannies, tutors, and impossible expectations to meet. It must have been lonely." "It was, still is." The storm outside seemed to reflect the emotional turmoil between them. The lights flickered again, and this time they went out completely, leaving them in darkness broken only by the lightning. "Damn," Brian muttered, searching for his cell phone to use as a flashlight. The emergency generator must have failed. In the dark, Laura moved instinctively closer to him, her heart racing not only from the fear of the darkness, but from the intoxicating proximity of the man who had become her secret obsession. "It's okay," Brian said softly, his voice too close to her ear. "It's just a power outage." But when a particularly intense lightning bolt illuminated the sky, followed immediately by a deafening thunderclap, Laura jumped and instinctively grabbed Brian's arm. "Sorry," she whispered, but didn't move away. No need to apologize. In the darkness, the other senses sharpened. Brian could smell Laura's delicate perfume, hear her quickened breathing, feel the warmth of her skin where she still touched his arm. And Laura could feel the contained strength in his body, the tension in his muscles, the altered rhythm of her own breathing. "Laura," he said, his voice husky with barely contained desire. "I know," she whispered. "I know I shouldn't. That this is crazy. But You what?" "I think about you. All the time. Even knowing it's wrong. Even knowing it can never work." The words hung in the dark air like a dangerous confession. Brian turned to her, and although they couldn't see each other clearly, they felt the proximity of each other like a magnetic force. "This will destroy us," he said. But his hands found her face in the darkness, his thumbs caressing her soft cheeks. "I know. Helena will announce our engagement next week." "I know." And even so, when his lips touched hers, it was as if the whole world was set on fire. The kiss started hesitant, almost reverent, but quickly turned into something urgent and desperate. Years of loneliness, of distrust, of carefully constructed protections, crumbled in that moment. Laura had never been kissed like that before, with a passion that seemed to consume everything around her. Her hands gripped Brian's shirt as if he were her only anchor in the storm, both the one outside and the one exploding inside her. "God," Brian murmured against her lips, "what have you done to me?" Before she could answer, the lights came back on suddenly, bathing them in a raw clarity that made them pull away as if they had been burned. They stared at each other, their lips swollen, their breathing uneven, the reality of what had happened, settling between them like a physical presence. "This can't happen again," Brian said, running his hands through his disheveled hair. "No," Laura agreed, touching her own lips, still sensitive. "Never again. Never again." But both of them knew they were lying. What had happened between them had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. The kiss had been a declaration clearer than any word. They desired each other with an intensity that made any pretense impossible. When Laura finally managed to leave, an hour after the rain subsided, she carried with her not only the memory of the kiss, but the terrible certainty that she had fallen hopelessly in love with a man she could never have. And Brian, alone in the office, knew that he had made the most dangerous mistake of his life, not just because he had betrayed Helena before even marrying her, but because he had discovered something he thought impossible. He was completely, irrevocably in love with Laura Costa. The next morning, Helena appeared at the office unannounced, an icy smile on her perfectly painted lips. "Darling, we need to discuss some necessary adjustments before our engagement." Brian greeted her with the most neutral expression he could muster, but inside, his heart was breaking. He knew that Helena was there to lay down the law, to make it clear that she knew about his feelings for Laura and that there would be consequences. When Laura arrived at work and saw Helena in Brian's office through the glass door, she understood immediately that everything had changed. The kiss the night before hadn't been the beginning of something, but the end. It was time to pay the price for daring to love someone who was out of her reach. Helena wasted no time on formalities when she entered Brian's office that morning. "Sit down," she said, taking control of the situation with the naturalness of someone born to command. "We have urgent matters to resolve." Brian obeyed, but maintained a defensive posture. He had known Helena long enough to know when she was in hunter mode. I hired a private investigator, darling, she began, pulling a black folder from her designer handbag. Nothing personal, you understand, just a necessary precaution before uniting our empires. Brian's blood ran cold, but he kept a blank expression. Investigate what? Your recent love life, your distractions. Helena spread a series of photographs. On the table, imagine my surprise to discover that you've been visiting Queens, a neighborhood so quaint. For someone of your status. The photos showed Brian getting out of the car in front of Laura's house, entering the commercial building with her, the two of them talking closely in the office. The last photo, taken with a telephoto lens the night before, showed their silhouettes kissing against the window during the power outage. Impressive what technology can capture nowadays, Helena murmured, observing the growing paleness on Brian's face. Infrared cameras are fascinating. What do you want? I want you to be smart, Brian. Laura Costa, isn't it? 26 years old, cleaning lady, poor family, virgin according to my sources. Helena's smile was predatory. A modern Cinderella. How romantic. Brian clenched his fists. Don't mention her. I will mention her because she's the problem that needs to be resolved before our wedding. Helena leaned forward. You have two options. Fire her immediately and never contact her again, or I make these photos public. Imagine the headlines. Tech tycoon involved with poor cleaning lady. Your reputation and hers will be destroyed. You wouldn't do that. Don't test me, darling. My family didn't build an empire by being sentimental. Helena stood up, smoothing her designer skirt. And there's more. I've discovered interesting things about the Costa family. Her mother owes 3 months of rent, her little brother needs knee surgery to continue playing soccer, and her little sister, well, it would be a shame if she lost the scholarship she needs so badly to enter university. You're blackmailing an innocent family. I'm protecting my interests. Our family has enough influence to ensure that the Costas never get a decent job in New York again. One call from me and they lose everything. Helena collected the photos. Or you can be sensible. Marry me as planned, and I guarantee that your little friend's family receives anonymous financial assistance, enough to solve all their problems. Brian felt nauseous. Helena had found the only thing in the world that mattered to Laura more than herself, her family. I need time to think. You have until tomorrow. The engagement announcement is on Friday, remember, 2 days. Helena kissed his cheek with calculated coldness. Choose wisely, darling. When Helena left, Brian remained motionless for several minutes, the weight of the blackmail crushing him. Laura would arrive at any moment, and he would need to feign normalcy while deciding how to protect her. Laura immediately realized that something was wrong when she entered the office. Brian was tense, avoided her gaze, and answered her attempts at conversation with monosyllables. Mr. Albright, did something happen? No, he lied. Just work matters. But throughout the day, Laura felt his eyes on her, a look loaded with sadness and something akin to despair. When he left for lunch, leaving her alone, she found one of the photos that Helena had forgotten under the table. It was her and Brian in the kiss from the night before. Laura's heart stopped. Someone had photographed them. Someone new. With trembling hands, she put the photo in her purse, her mind racing with the implications. If those images became public, Brian would be humiliated, and she would be labeled an opportunist for the rest of her life. When Brian returned, Laura confronted him. Someone photographed us last night. Brian closed his eyes, the last hope of keeping Laura out of it dissolving. How did you find out? I found a photo on the floor. She showed it to him, her hands shaking. Mr. Albright, what does this mean? It means it's over, he said with a coldness that cut Laura like a knife. Everything that happened between us is over. I don't understand. Helena knows. She has all the photos, and she'll use them against you and your family if I don't marry her. Laura paled. What kind of threat? Brian hesitated, but knew that she deserved to know the truth. She can destroy your family financially, make you lose everything. Your mother would lose her job, your sister would lose her scholarship, your brother wouldn't get the surgery. Laura's legs weakened. She leaned against the table, the world spinning around her. My family has nothing to do with this. To Helena, they're just pawns on the chessboard. Brian's voice was laden with self-loathing. She knows it's the only way to control me. So that's it. Laura raised her chin, fighting back tears. You're going to marry her? I have no choice. There's always a choice. Not when the alternative is seeing you and your family destroyed because of me. Brian approached, but stopped when he saw her recoil. Laura, if there were any other way. There is, she said softly. I can disappear. What? If I leave New York, if I disappear from your life, she'll have nothing to use against us anymore. Laura took a deep breath, each word hurting like glass in her throat. I have an aunt upstate. I can go there with my family. No. Brian's response was immediate and vehement. I won't let you sacrifice your life because of me. And I won't let my family pay for my mistake of falling in love with the wrong man. The words hung in the air like a confession and a death sentence at the same time. Laura had admitted that she loved him, but she was also saying goodbye. Laura, don't say anything, please. She began to gather her belongings. It's better this way. You'll marry Helena, I'll rebuild my life far away from here, and everyone will forget this ever happened. I'll never forget, Brian said, his voice breaking. Then it will hurt forever, Laura replied, the tears finally overflowing, for both of us. She headed for the door, but turned back one last time. I don't regret the kiss. I don't regret falling in love. I only regret not being the right person for you to love. And with that, she left, leaving Brian alone with the weight of Helena's blackmail and the certainty that he had lost the only woman he had ever truly loved. On the other side of the door, Helena watched Laura walk down the hallway, a satisfied smile on her lips. She had arrived half an hour earlier and heard the whole conversation. Perfect. The little innocent had decided to sacrifice herself for the greater good. How noble, how idiotic. Now she just needed to make sure that Laura really disappeared, and she had exactly the plan for that. The next morning, Laura didn't show up for work. Brian spent the entire day trying to focus on business while his heart broke with each passing minute. At 5 in the afternoon, unable to take it anymore, he drove to Queens. The Costa house was in an uproar. Marlene was on the couch, crying, while Julia, Laura's sister, tried to comfort her. Caio, the younger brother, was pale in the corner of the room. Mr. Albright, Julia said when she saw him at the door, you need to know, they took Laura. Brian's blood ran cold. What do you mean? They took her. 2 men came here in the middle of the night, Marlene explained between sobs. They said she was involved in money laundering, that she was being investigated for theft at your company. They took her away in handcuffs in front of all the neighbors. Brian felt the floor collapse beneath his feet. Helena had carried out her threat, but in an even crueler way than he had imagined. Where is she now? At central booking, but they won't let anyone see her, Julia said. They said she'll be transferred to a women's correctional facility until the trial. What evidence do they have? Forged documents, forged bank transfers to her account. All planted, Marlene murmured. My daughter has never stolen a cent in her life, but who will believe the word of a poor cleaning lady against a corporate empire? Brian clenched his fists. Helena hadn't just blackmailed, she had forged evidence to destroy Laura completely. It was diabolical. I'm going to get her out of there, he promised. How? Julia asked desperately. The newspapers are already talking, look. She showed him her cell phone. The headlines were devastating. Cleaning lady steals millions from tech tycoon. Cinderella turned criminal. Brian Albright, victim of romantic scam. The articles painted Laura as a calculating opportunist who had seduced the innocent boss to steal from his company. There were photos of her being arrested, cruel comments on social media, malicious speculation about her true motives. "My daughter is going to die in jail," Marlene cried. "An innocent girl like her. She won't survive." Brian left the Costa house with a murderous rage coursing through his veins. He drove straight to Helena's mansion in the Upper East Side, barging into the property without ceremony. Helena was waiting for him in the living room, a glass of wine in her hand and a triumphant smile on her lips. "Darling, what a surprise. Have you come to discuss the details of our wedding?" "I was thinking of something intimate, considering the recent circumstances." "You psychopath," Brian roared. "You forged evidence against an innocent person. I protected my interests. Our relationship would be impossible with that distraction in the way." Helena sipped her wine calmly. "And it worked perfectly. Your little friend won't bother anyone anymore. She could be sentenced to years in prison for crimes she didn't commit. 20 years, according to my lawyer. What a pity." Helena's tone was icy, without a hint of remorse. "But you can reduce her sentence." "How?" "Marry me tomorrow. Make a public statement saying that you were manipulated, that you realized in time the scam she was running. In exchange, I use my influence to ensure she only gets 5 years in a more comfortable prison." Brian stared at her in horror. "You want me to destroy her reputation publicly? I want you to choose 5 years of decent prison or 20 years in hell. Oh, and if you try to report me or expose my actions, I guarantee that she will be the one to pay the price. My family has judges, prosecutors, and detectives on the payroll for decades." The trap was perfect. Helena had created a situation where any attempt by Brian to save Laura would only hurt her more, and time was running out. "You have until tomorrow morning to decide," Helena said, rising. "The wedding is at 2 in the afternoon. The public statement will be at 3. Choose wisely." Brian left there feeling like he was drowning. He spent the entire night in the office, trying to find a way out, looking for lawyers, investigators, anyone who could help. But the forged evidence was perfect, and the influence of the Montero family was absolute. The next morning, he drove to Central Booking. He managed 5 minutes with Laura through a police contact who still owed him favors. She was devastated. The orange prison jumpsuit swallowed her delicate figure, and there were bruises on her arms, signs that she wasn't being treated well. "Laura, don't say anything," she whispered, her eyes red from crying. "I understand. You need to protect yourself. It's not about me. It's about you. Helena forged the evidence. I know, but no one will believe my word against hers." Laura touched the glass that separated them. "You need to marry her. It's the only way to minimize the damage." "I can't do that to you." "You can, and you will, because if you don't, they'll transfer me to a prison where I won't last a week." Her voice was firm, but the tears fell without stopping. "And my family will suffer even more." "Laura, listen to me carefully, Brian Albright," she said with a determination that surprised him. "I love you. I love you in a way I never thought possible. But this love is destroying us. If you really love me, marry Helena, give that statement, and let me pay for the crime of falling in love with you. I can't, you can, and you will. Because that's what people who love each other do. They protect each other, even if it means sacrificing themselves." Time was up. The guard indicated that the visit was over. Laura stood up, and Brian saw her silhouette disappear down the dark hallways of central booking. 3 hours later, Brian Albright stood before a crowd of reporters alongside Helena Montero, newly married, in a whirlwind ceremony. His voice was mechanical as he read the statement prepared by Helena. "I was the victim of a calculating manipulation. Ms. Costa took advantage of my trust to commit crimes against my company. I regret being naive enough not to realize her true intentions." Each word was like swallowing shards of glass. Each sentence destroyed a little more of the woman he loved, but it was the only way to save her from an even worse fate. Helena smiled. Beside him, radiant with victory. That night, at the Bedford Hills Correctional Facility for Women, Laura watched the statement on the community television news. She saw the man she loved publicly deny her, destroy her reputation, and confirm all the fabricated lies against her. But she didn't feel anger. She felt only a deep sadness, because she knew that Brian was sacrificing himself as much as she was, that he was dying inside with every word he spoke. Their love had become a Greek tragedy, two hearts that met only to destroy each other. Everything was lost. Love had been buried under lies, blackmail, and the cruelty of a system that protected the powerful and crushed the vulnerable, and Helena Montero had won completely. 6 months had passed since Brian's forced marriage to Helena. Laura had been sentenced to 8 years in prison, a generosity from the judicial system that Helena made a point of highlighting as proof of her magnanimity. Brian lived like a ghost in his own life, fulfilling marital and business obligations with Helena while his soul withered. At the Bedford Hills Correctional Facility for Women, Laura had found a strength she didn't know she possessed. At first, the other inmates saw her as the rich girl who had tried to scam her boss. But her genuine humility, her willingness to help her companions with their letters and legal problems, and especially her refusal to speak ill of Brian, gradually earned the respect of the others. It was Carmen Santos, a former accountant convicted of embezzlement, who first questioned the official version of the facts. "Girl, I've seen a lot of fraud in my life," she said, as they shared the meager lunch in the cafeteria. "And what they did to you doesn't add up. The bank transfers they used as evidence, the times don't make sense. You were working when you supposedly made those transactions. But who will believe it? Maybe no one, but the truth has power of its own." Carmen leaned forward. "I have contacts on the outside, people who can investigate properly without being on the Montero's payroll." Meanwhile, Brian was discovering that living with Helena was worse than any prison. She controlled every aspect of his life, his schedules, his meetings, even his phone conversations. The Albright empire was slowly being absorbed by the Montero businesses, and Brian found himself losing control of the company he had built. "You seem tense, darling," Helena said during a formal dinner with foreign investors. "Perhaps you need relaxation. I heard your former employee is adapting well to prison. What a relief to know she's no longer causing problems." The mention of Laura made Brian clench his fists under the table. Helena noticed and smiled, savoring the power she had over him. But Helena had underestimated one thing: the loyalty of Brian's longtime employees. Carla, his former secretary, had been fired shortly after the wedding and replaced by someone Helena trusted. Embittered, she decided it was time for Brian to know some truths. On a rainy afternoon, Carla waited for Brian in the company parking lot. "We need to talk," she said without preamble. "Carla, you know I can't—" "Helena is cheating on you," she interrupted. "With Ricardo Vasconcelos." Brian knew Ricardo, a Portuguese businessman who had recently approached the Montero family, interested in partnerships in Brazil. "I have photos," Carla continued, showing the envelope in her hands. "Copacabana Palace Hotel. Every Thursday, always the same room. And there's more. He's not just an affair. They're planning something against you. What kind of thing? I don't know yet, but I've overheard fragments of phone conversations. Something about when he's out of the way, and the company will finally be ours. Carla handed over the envelope. Helena is more dangerous than you imagine, Brian. And if she was able to destroy an innocent person like Laura to get what she wanted, what would she be capable of doing to me? Brian completed, the realization hitting him like a punch. That same week in prison, Laura received an unexpected visitor. It was Marcos, an investigative journalist whom Carmen had contacted. Ms. Costa, I've been investigating irregularities in the judicial system related to the Montero family for 2 years, he explained. Your case caught my attention because it doesn't follow the usual pattern of corruption. It was too elaborate, too specific. Do you believe in my innocence? I believe you were handpicked to be destroyed. The question is why? What did you represent as such a great threat to Helena Montero? Laura told her story for the first time in its entirety. The work at the mansion, the gradual approach with Brian, the kiss on the night of the storm, Helena's threats. She didn't do it just to get Brian, Marcos said, taking notes. She did it to make sure you could never tell the truth about how she managed to force him into marriage. You are the only living witness to the blackmail. But I have no proof. Not yet, but I will get it. Marcos closed his notebook. I have sources in the district attorney's office who aren't corrupt. If we can get solid evidence of the fabrication, of the evidence against you, we can not only overturn your conviction, but expose the whole scheme. Brian, in turn, decided it was time to act. He discreetly hired a private investigator he completely trusted, someone who had served with him in the army years before. Detective Ribeiro began following Helena and discovered not only the affair with Ricardo, but a much wider network of corruption. Your marriage was just the first step in a larger plan, Ribeiro revealed in a secret meeting at a coffee shop downtown. Helena and Ricardo plan to completely take over your company. They've already bribed 3 members of the board of directors and are preparing a lawsuit to declare you mentally incapacitated to run the business. Based on what? Severe depression, erratic behavior, questionable business decisions. They have bought off psychiatrists ready to testify. Ribeiro slid a folder across the table, and there's more. Helena hasn't stopped there. She's ordered them to intensify the pressure on Laura in prison. Brian's blood ran cold. What kind of pressure? The kind that can result in a fatal accident, a fight between inmates that gets out of control, a suicide out of despair. Helena wants to make sure Laura never gets out of prison alive. Brian felt a murderous rage taking over him. Helena wasn't just destroying his life, she was planning to murder the woman he loved. How much time do we have? Not much. The orders were given yesterday. It could be a matter of days. That night, Brian made the most important decision of his life. No matter the price he paid, no matter if he lost everything, he wouldn't let Helena win. It was time to fight. He called Carla. I need your help, and we're going to need allies. What kind of allies? Everyone we can get. Journalists, lawyers, investigators, anyone Helena hasn't corrupted yet. Brian looked out the office window, seeing the lights of the city. That had once been his. We're going to war. Across town, in prison, Laura didn't know she was in a race against time. But she had noticed that some inmates were looking at her differently lately, that conversations stopped when she approached, that her cell was being watched more closely. Carmen had noticed it too. Girl, you need to be smart. Something's going on. There are people in here receiving orders from the outside. What kind of orders? The kind that can put you in a grave. Laura felt fear freeze her veins, but she also felt something else: determination. If Helena wanted to silence her permanently, it was because she was afraid of the truth. And if she was afraid, it meant that the truth could still win. The stage was set for the final confrontation: Brian, Laura, and their few allies against the empire of corruption and lies that Helena had built. But time was running out, and Helena had all the advantages. Except for one: she had underestimated the power of true love and the strength of people who had nothing left to lose. Brian had only 48 hours to save Laura and expose Helena before it was too late. Working feverishly with Carla, the journalist, Marcos, and Detective Ribeiro, he put together a risky plan that would depend on perfect timing and a lot of luck. The first step was to get access to the security recordings of the commercial building where Laura worked. Ribeiro discovered that the infrared cameras had captured not only the kiss between Brian and Laura, but also Helena entering the building the next morning with two unidentified men, the same ones who would later find the forged evidence in the company's system. This proves that she was at the location where the evidence was planted, Marco said, analyzing the images. But we still need more. The second step was more dangerous. Brian needed to record Helena confessing to her crimes. To do this, he would have to confront her directly, using her own narcissism against herself. On the night before the deadline, Brian arrived home to find Helena in the study, talking on the phone in broken Portuguese with Ricardo. "Yes, darling, everything will be resolved tomorrow," she was saying. "The girl won't bother us anymore, and Brian will be completely broken. The company will be ours." When she hung up, Brian entered the room with a glass of whiskey and a carefully rehearsed expression of defeat. "You won, Helena," he said, the discreet recorder in his pocket recording everything. "You destroyed everything I loved. You got my company, my life." Helena turned, surprised by his defeated tone. "Have you finally accepted reality?" "I accept that you are smarter than me, more cruel, more determined." Brian approached. "How did you manage to forge the evidence so perfectly? How did you corrupt so many people at the same time?" Helena's ego couldn't resist the opportunity to boast. "Years of planning, darling. From the moment I decided you would be mine, I started mapping all the weaknesses in the system. Corrupt judges, ambitious prosecutors, indebted detectives, everyone has a price. And Laura? Why her specifically?" "Because you loved her." Helena laughed cruelly. "I saw it in your eyes that first morning when I returned from overseas. You had found something I could never be: genuine purity. That was unacceptable. So you invented the crimes." "Invented? Darling, I created a work of art. Backdated. Bank transfers, documents with your forged signature authorizing the payments, even fake text messages on her phone, planning the scam." Helena sipped her wine, savoring each word. "And tomorrow, when she suffers her accident in prison, you will finally understand that there was never any escape." "What kind of accident?" "A fight between inmates that gets out of control. Poor Laura trying to defend a weaker companion, but being beaten to death by a rival group. Tragic, but common in women's prisons." Helena smiled coldly. "I've already paid the right people. It will be quick." Brian felt nauseous, but maintained a impassive expression. "And then you'll have a nervous breakdown. You'll be admitted to a private psychiatric clinic where competent doctors will conclude that you are unfit to manage your business. I take over everything as a dedicated wife. Ricardo becomes my official partner, and we live happily ever after." "You thought of everything." "I always think of everything, darling. That's why I always win." It was then that Carla entered the room without knocking, followed by Marcos, two detectives from the FBI, and a recording crew from an investigative television program. Ms. Helena Montero Albright, said the older detective. You are under arrest for racketeering, forgery, bribery of public officials, attempted homicide, and conspiracy to commit murder. Helena's face turned ashen as she realized the trap. She looked at Brian, who was holding the recorder, then at the cameras recording everything. This is a setup. You can't. We can, Marco said, flashing his journalist badge. Especially when we have your confession recorded and broadcast live to the entire country. As Helena was handcuffed, screaming threats and denials, Brian was already running to the car. He needed to get to the prison before her orders were carried out. At the Bedford Hills Correctional Facility for Women, Laura was being escorted to the yard when she realized something was wrong. 5 women surrounded her, hostile looks and clenched fists. Your time has come, rich girl, snarled the leader, a burly woman with scars on her face. Someone paid good money to make sure you don't get out of here alive. But before they could attack, Carmen appeared with a group of other inmates who had become Laura's friends. If you want to get to her, you'll have to go through us, Carmen said firmly. What followed was a free-for-all in the prison yard, with sirens blaring and guards running to contain the situation. But the chaos was interrupted by the sudden arrival of an official delegation. Laura Costa, shouted a male voice she recognized immediately. It was Brian, accompanied by FBI agents, lawyers, and a television crew. He ran to her, ignoring protocols and cameras, and wrapped her in a desperate embrace. It's okay, he whispered. In her ear, it's over. Helena is arrested. You're free. How? The truth came out. All the evidence against you was fabricated. Your conviction will be overturned, and Helena will pay for everything she did. In the days that followed, the scandal dominated all the news in the country. Helena was sentenced to 20 years in prison for her crimes. Ricardo Vasconcelos was extradited to Portugal to answer for international corruption, and dozens of corrupt officials were exposed and arrested. Laura was officially exonerated and received a multi-million-dollar settlement from the state for the months she had unjustly spent in prison. But what mattered to her wasn't the money. It was the freedom to finally be with the man she loved. 6 months later, in a simple ceremony at the church in the neighborhood where Laura grew up, Brian Albright married the woman who had transformed his life. Marlene cried with emotion as she saw her daughter walking down the aisle, dressed in white, finally free to live her love. Are you sure you won't regret it? Whispered Laura as they exchanged rings. I'm still just a former cleaning lady from Queens. Brian smiled, holding her delicate hands in his. You were never just anything, Laura. You are the woman who taught me that true love still exists, that purity and kindness are not weaknesses, but the greatest strengths in the world. You are my salvation. And as they kissed before a church, filled with friends, family, and even some former fellow inmates who came to celebrate the victory of justice, everyone could see that sometimes, just sometimes, love really does win. Brian used his fortune to create a foundation to support people who were unjustly convicted, with Laura as executive director. Together, they built not only a happy life, but a legacy of justice and hope. And every time someone said that social differences were insurmountable or that love didn't conquer all, they simply smiled and pointed to their own story. Living. Proof that when two souls truly meet, not all the power and corruption in the world can separate them. The empire that Brian had built continued to grow, but now it had a heart, and that heart beat with the same rhythm as the simple, pure heart of the woman who once cleaned his offices and ended up cleaning his soul as well. They lived happily, ever after, as in fairy tales, because sometimes, just sometimes, life imitates art, and true love really does triumph over everything.